One of the big challenges that we are covering here at the Business of Data Festival is connecting the business with the data and technology function. And I am very excited to be joined by a thought leader exactly covering that. Dara, welcome to the festival. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Now, I think the best place for us to begin is if you wouldn't mind shedding a bit of light into your role.
Sure. No, thank you. So I have the absolute pleasure of overseeing technology at Connair. Connair LLC is a consumer goods product group, and I get the pleasure of overseeing the IT department, which is digital data infrastructure, hardware securities, and so on. So it's a great role. It's got a lot underneath it, especially in the digital parts right now.
And I mean, it's such a diverse role, what you've just listed off there, and it's multifaceted. What are the big challenges that you're seeing in your role at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's really the transformation. Right now, we're seeing so many things go out to a cloud initiative, which then transpires into the digital transformation, which is all the data points, and really seeing so many things come forward into the business units, connecting those pieces between what's happening in IT and what we can do to drive the business on the forefront. And so right now it's that whole, how can I be anywhere at any time and see the data that I need and be able to react to that and be very transformative to the business.
And I mean, it's such a great point to make there about be wherever you are, because so many organizations are hybrid. You could be, the world is opening back up, thankfully, after several years of us all being in one place. And the fact that we are now all over the place. For many people watching here, they may have thought leaders who are back in the office. They may have people who are back at home. So this is actually a very, very interesting point that you make about having that pure access to the data.
Yeah, it's such an important point today, I think, for us. I mean, look, we're connecting here today, which is so wonderful, right? And we're in New York. But I could be doing the same simulation anywhere, right? And that's one of the things that we see in digital technology today, is that we're seeing all of these different initiatives go to be able to accessory, do business anywhere at any point at any time and be very successful with it. Make it seamless so that whether you're doing B2B business transactions or B2C transactions, or whether you're just trying to drive the data into your end consumer points in other ways, it's a way of you just hitting them without them knowing what's happening from behind, right? It's kind of like, it's behind the curtain, I think, that you can do it anywhere at any point. So it's exciting right now.
Yeah. Talk to me about the big themes and trends that you're seeing with connecting the dots between technology and business, and perhaps some of the pain points, but then perhaps some of the opportunities that you're seeing as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I just came off one of the really great in-person sessions from your organization out in San Francisco, and we talked a lot about big data, what it meant, LP ops, how that was being used, right? What is that repetition, and how are we being able to use things over and over again? And how people are transpiring into that. And I think one of the big things right now is getting data to the right touch points, being able to visually tell the difference between, what's too much information and what we can use. I think a lot of people get into the data stream of things and they suddenly become overwhelmed, and the data is just too much for them to compile and do something very useful with it. And I think what we were trying to talk about were the trends of how to make that data accessible and then actually transpiring and doing something with it, right? What are those transactions against those data points? And so now some of the big trends are really how do we automate that so that when you're looking at things like AI and you're building your different models against it, how do you actually take that and replicate it to be other models that are successful within the industry? How do you take all of those different dashboards and industry standards, and how do you model them to be successful within your own business? And so it's the communication factor around it. It's looking at all the data and making sure you streamline it into the right points. And I think we're looking at a lot of the trends around this are taking those key, I would say, buzzwords, right, and making them so that they're very communicative into the industry so that people are seeing them and they're essential to their business. We talk about, taking an AI model. What does AI mean to a business today, right? How can you get to that level of it? People need to stop, take a look at what business intelligence is, how they're going to do the reporting relationship, and then how do they build those models into it. So it's the practicality of business and then rolling it into really the instrumental factors of then driving it into a repetitive motion, an intelligent motion that they can then use for the future. So there's just so much to landscape there.
So much, so much. And I think it's really interesting. I think we could have quite easily titled this session Bringing Everyone Onto the Same Page as well. And I think you've done something really interesting there by using that example of AI. And I'm sure if we asked all of our audience members today to write down, what does AI mean to you? We're going to get so many definitions. And that's practitioners. Right. So by the time you bring that over to the business and say, how do you think AI is going to be used or is being used in your organization? Again, we're going to come up with even more definitions. So that internal work of bringing everyone on the same page or connecting the dots, however you want to phrase it, is so key to going forwards. If you wouldn't mind, shed some light on your experience in your career that you've had with collaboration. How are you seeing the technology function, data functions, and the business collaborating? Is this becoming easier now? Is it harder now? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I actually think it's becoming a bit easier right now, and I'll be honest. I think people are actually starting to trend into technology in a different way, right? We used to say, oh, well, everybody had a smartphone and that's all they needed, but they actually need a lot more, right? And so when we look at the core sourcing of what people are trying to touch point, when they look at applications in their offices, they actually are intrigued further, which I love, right? They're no longer just calling up and saying, how do I just do my job? They're saying, how can I do my job better? And that's a core piece of all this. So the communication is very important. I think having an open dialogue within the business units or with your partners in any realm is very key to understanding what you can do to landscape the technology in the right way, and then give them the pieces of practice that they need, right? So if I'm working with a business partner and they say to me, quite honestly, look, we're not staffed to be able to do these business models within technology, like within the reporting structure or within the digital structure or in just an application, then quite honestly, you have to find them different avenues to be able to do their business in the right way. And as you do that, you're generally educating them to bring them up to the point where everybody else is, right? And so today, a lot of it's just about listening and understanding what people need. And then once you do that, you can align your business practices against that and bring the technology in that fits their models, right? I always say, again, we talk about buzzwords, but they're so important out there that people hear them. But we have to understand them and be able to say, this is the practical time that we can apply them. And this is the time where we have to step back and say to people like, hey, you're interested in this. How are we going to deliver X within a certain period of time and delivering it well within the right reporting and structure for them? So it's all about communication, all about it.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting there actually that you mentioned about harnessing the power of a buzzword.
Yeah.
And it's about taking that passion, but as the practitioner, guiding it appropriately, not just saying, okay, you know this word, let's run with it and do this AI because you said you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And it's the job of us as data leaders to question, okay, you've heard this word and you kind of understand it. We're not going to be patronizing. You kind of understand this. But what is it you think you need out of this? And almost to ask those greater questions, because it could be that they don't have necessarily the language or the skill or the knowledge to say this is exactly what we want, and it's our job to kind of direct that.
That's 100%. And to be honest, from a technology perspective, it doesn't mean my teams are ready for it either, right?
Yeah.
As new things are coming on, you still have to educate your own departments to be able to rely and use those different core technologies. So if you're not ready for it, how are you ever going to propose it to another business partner just because we all know it's in the industry? No, those things are always going to happen in trend, right? Digital transformation or transformation in a business happens every day. It's been happening. What we have to do is make sure that we align and make sure that people understand what's really great for them, getting them right reporting, getting them the right data points, and then showing them how to use that, and then saying, what else can we do for you, right? What more can we offer you? And education is the core of it. Communication, education, and development and planning together is how we succeed.
Now, I'm going to guess your answer to this next question. I'm going to suggest that you're going to say a bit of both. You mentioned education. Is it your preference that the business is upskilled in their knowledge of technology and data, or that the data and technology teams grasp this storytelling concept we're hearing so much of at the moment, and that they're able to curate their language that's more accessible to the business. Now, I'm going to guess you're going to tell me somewhere in between.
Of course, yeah.
And I'd love to know, throughout your career and your experience, have you seen one work really well and the other not? Or what's been your experience in that?
It's a really great question. I think you've asked something I haven't really heard too many people ask before, so I appreciate that. I would say it's a blend, but I would go heavier on the technology side, I'll be honest. In many ways, we can't assume that someone who's really great in marketing or product or finance, right, or operations is going to know a lot about technology. That's not their expertise. What we can assume is that they'll know enough to have a great conversation with us and ask us what our thought process is and what we would do, or they have enough that they've gone out and said, okay, how can I better educate myself to align with you, right? But we can't expect that they're going to have all the knowledge and well-being that we need. And so what we have to do is actually be able to digest and then reinterpret, as you were just mentioning, and really help guide. And that doesn't mean that what we give them as guidance is going to be the Bible, right? It means that they're going to be able to at least understand and then ask us curated questions that are going to say, how can we go out and do comparatives? What can we do to better satisfy this entire model? And so oftentimes, just that open collaboration and understanding together is going to give us a successful, result in the end. And projects will work so much better, not just the first one, but then the second one, and the third one, and the fourth one. And as you keep developing those relationships and education with them, they'll keep educating themselves to become a better business partner, technology partner, and leader, so that we are constantly then growing and learning together.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the journey we want to be on as well.
Right.
And I think I'm always very conscious to use the language of journey, because there is no destination necessarily, because it's a constant evolution. And in 5-10 years' time, we'll be having a conversation of things so far down the line now, in a sense of future capabilities as well.
100%. I mean, look, technology every day. I get amazed by every new app, every new thing that comes out, right? And so, I go out to big experience models, and I'll go out to conferences, or I'll listen to, people podcasts. I'll do white papers. As much as I read and as much as I understand, the next day someone creates something new, right? And then suddenly I'm like, what does that mean? How is that going to be interpreted? And as I'm doing those passing journeys, so is everyone else, right? So we're all kind of figuring it out together, because whatever you thought you learned back in the day, and then you learned in between, and you learned till today, it's just changing, right? And so it's important to just keep educating and developing. Great organizations like what you have are ones that help us to keep in task and keep touch points together. Some of the best is your peer-to-peer acknowledgements, your peer-to-peer understanding, and like how they're taking new tech and developing into their insertion. We're all doing something slightly different, but yet the same. So it's a really great journey together.
Yeah, and it's exactly what you've said there. It's that education is continuous.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just stop at one point. It doesn't stop with a degree or a master's or a PhD, etc. It's continuous, and it's one of the most exciting things about the space that we're in, right? Is that it is constantly evolving.
Yeah, and as a tech leader, you can't sit back and just watch everyone else. You actually have to be involved and engage. You have to understand what everyone's doing so that you can be a part of the conversation, so you can make logical decisions, so you can reflect that within your business and budget, right? So that people can actually look to you and say, I actually need support still. Yeah. And it wasn't just something that they were looking for in a soft guidance, they were looking for technical reviews as well. And that's an important part of this. I think it was, people could sit back in the day and just watch the business groups kind of merge and figure out what they wanted. And be their own silos. And today you have to really bring the businesses together to make the most success out of your cost funding, your relationships, the way that you're going to grow your businesses externally. So it's huge.
I think, Dara, there's some telepathy going on here, because in fact, the next question I wanted to ask you was about silos. And when I was creating this session for us, and I use the language connecting the dots, because in many organizations I hear there is always going to be this level of silo thinking of, you've got this department over here, this organization. Some might be closer, some might be more collaborative, as you mentioned. Some always are going to be kind of on an island somewhat. What's been your experience with this collaboration, but with the context of silos and engaging people that may be quite different not one rule fits all, right?
Oh, 100%. I mean, not one rule fits everyone in your own household, let alone in a business, right? So that's just one of those traditional trends. I love opening up, and one of the things I said to you is you have to be a listener first, right? So if you're in tech and you want to actually bridge the gaps with someone, you have to sit down first and hear what they have to say, right? And let them just speak about their business. They're the experts within their business field for whatever reason, for the factors that they are. And it's really based on their background, their knowledge, their partnerships, whatever it is. They know it all, right? And we are just there to listen and then help them to execute. And so some of the things I used to do is, popular was bring in food, right? So before, we'd sit down for a meeting, I'd bring in all kinds of different food and say, this is a way for all of us to communicate. You do it so well at dinners, you do it so well at luncheons, why not do it within a conference room as well? And people open up and they transpire differently, right? They start talking about the way the food interacts with the way that the business interacts, and suddenly this whole other conversation comes about. But we spend the time, and I really instill the fact to my teams that they have to get from behind their desk and they have to go out and they have to figure out what their partnerships are doing. They have to figure out how hard the relationships are within the, social media side of it, within the business side of it, within the financial side of it, whatever it might be. They have to figure out what's happening out there and be able to relate it, bring it back in, digest it, and be able to, recommunicate it. So for us, it's all about, again, just people could be, I say this, you could be the smartest person in the room, you could have all the technology language, but if you can't communicate and talk with someone, you've missed the entire conversation and you've shut down the entire, room. And so unfortunately, I could drive as many technology languages out to someone, but if I can't openly talk to them, then we've not actually had a dialogue and we've not had a successful meeting. That's how I look at it.
100%. It was a few seasons ago now on the Business of Data podcast, I sat down with a thought leader and he said something so interesting to me that I hadn't thought about, which is kind of the upcoming talent and the graduate schemes of coming out of school. And he said, okay, you've learned how to do the skill set of it, of things, but now you need to be mentored and learn how to do the people side. Because you might, just as you say there, you might be the best in your class, but if you don't learn the political structures in an organization and how to find a champion and how to really engage, then that's where the conversation ends.
So interesting enough, that's one of my big things right now. I always say this, when people come out of school, they're probably some of the smartest people I've met, and they have such bold and great ideas that I want to take them all in and be able to use them. But when they go out to communicate, one of the biggest things I find is that the first thing is they can't write an email. Right? The basic common communication and language that occurs within anything is that email, right? It's the preference of how we all do business. Unfortunately, they get out and they say there's, all kinds of emojis, all kinds of ideas, all kinds of shortcuts, and they forget there's this common language, and they don't teach that in school. They don't teach the practicality of that. And so when people come out, the first thing we do is teach them the core skills of that. And it's really important. I'll send them in through just this little, hey, one-on-one course with me of just how to communicate within business. Once you can adapt to that, then suddenly you're opening new doors in a different way. And you're not shutting down and putting up too many exclamation points or whatever might bolds, right? But again, when we talk about the way that their journeys happen, during the pandemic, there was a big gap from people that were hired during the I'm out of office, now having to come in prem. There's a gap between that. How do I learn business, right? You, again, could be the smartest technologist out there, but if you don't know how to bring in and learn how to do the business, understand the culture, understand who those players are, how do they interact, what are those emotional roles, right? It's a big part of it. So there's a growth methodology around all of that technology is embedded into, and it's a core part of all of us doing business. So right now we look at things like, how do we bridge those gaps, right? How do we bring people in successfully and learn about our culture when they've been so far apart about it? How do we do that when they're hybrid? How do we do that when they're remote? What do we do to bring those interpersonal cores? And so we're working towards that a lot. We're spending a lot of time around it, and I think companies should, because otherwise they'll be unsuccessful for the generations that keep coming, that they won't know how to do those connective tissues together.
100%. Couldn't agree more. Well, Dara, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Wow, what a fantastic morning we have had here at the Business of Data Festival 2022 Summer Edition. We are now going to be heading into our live regional sessions, so please do come armed with your questions. Our speakers will be more than happy to answer them. We're going to have a range of formats for you, from presentation through to panel discussion. And don't forget, you also have the resource area available to you as well, with lots more goodies and content available. But for now, let's head into our live sessions.